Good morning. I'm sure most of you didn't suspect that some guy with long hairs playing Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton was... I was wondering how many of you would actually turn and look, because musicians are always the sideshow at events and just fills voids and spaces. But the reason I said to Michelle that she asked me if I could sing, and I said, sure, why not? It isn't something that I would normally do, but it sort of serves a dichotomy between what our heart wants and believes in what our head can do. And very often in our lives, we separate the two. And the most successful people from a heart, mind, and soul perspective globally are people that can balance the two together. Some call it bipolar, some call it schizophrenia. I just call it being able to be human. And the most fortunate people on this planet are people that can make both facets of their life work. And that's what we call living life with purpose. So, Michelle said Wall Street. I'd like to say ex-Wall Street for the right reasons. I'm going to talk very briefly about some life experiences that I've had, why I currently live in South Africa, and the purpose of what I'm doing in the venture capital and tech space. It will not be very insurance and salesy, because that's what you guys are experts at. But it'll touch upon the importance for innovation across the digital sort of soundboard. In insurance and finance and banking and retail and commerce, etc. But before that, I've called this the audacity of resilience, which is a play on Obama's book, The Audacity of Hope, that I'm hoping some of you would have read. But it's the journey I've had over the last 8 years of living, loving, and launching things in Africa. So about 15 years ago, if I'm revealing my age here, I was sitting in the back row of a small classroom at Stanford University at the business school. And there was a professor called Randy Komisar, who's now one of the GPs at one of Silicon Valley's top venture capital funds. And he was speaking to our business school class. I was 22 at the time. And he said this one sentence that has stuck with me for the last 15 years and probably remained with me for the rest of my life. And it said, There is the most dangerous risk of all in our lives. And you guys would know a thing or two about risk. The risk of spending your life not doing what you want, on the bet that you can buy yourself the freedom to do it later. Right? So just pause in this for a few seconds and understand what that deeply means. How many of us, and you don't have to tell me, just think about it, because no one's on the spot here. How many of us are really doing in our lives what really matches our heart, our head, and our soul? And how many of us are doing what we happen to be good at and not marrying the three together? And how many of us say, when I'm 50, when I'm 60, when I'm 70, I'll do that. I'll buy myself the time. I'll save up enough money to do what I really want to do. Just ponder that for a second. The concept of resilience is essentially a mix of two things, passion and drive. Passion is something that pulls you towards something that you cannot resist. It's a pulling motion. And drive is something that pushes you. It's an obligation to pay the bills, to have a car, spouse and kids and school. That's drive. Nothing wrong with drive. But passion and drive are two very different things. Right? And it's very important when you look at your life going forward to balance your passion and your drive in what you do. So when I decided to, I'll tell you my story in a second, but when I decided to leave Wall Street and start on a journey of entrepreneurship, it's not easy at all. As I'm sure most of you as brokers would have gone through a similar process whenever you decided to start doing what you do. So entrepreneurship really is living a few years of your life like most people would never do, so that you can spend the rest of your life like most people can't. And that's what entrepreneurship is all about. And entrepreneurship is not just tech entrepreneurship. It's not the guys that start Airbnb, Twitter, and Dropbox, and Facebook, because those are the kind of people that I deal with. But entrepreneurship is everyone. The mom and pop entrepreneur, the entrepreneur that starts a clothing business, a manufacturing business. But it's the commitment and the risk that they take, the sacrifice that they make to get to where they are right now. These are just a few life lessons that I've learned over the last 30 years. Don't be cocky. Don't be flashy. There is always someone that's better than you. Arrogance is one of the biggest killers. It's the one thing in life that I hate the most is arrogance. And if you find yourself as the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Leave it. There's nothing to be gained by knowing everything. And I've had the privilege of being in rooms with the CEOs of some of the wealthiest corporations on this planet, from Silicon Valley to New York to India to all over. And even them, some of the people that I respect the most are also the most humble people. And humility is one of the greatest virtues that you can ever have. So please remember that when you do business. This is an old Zulu proverb, I think. The things you do for yourself are gone when you are gone. The things you do for others remain as your legacy. So all the people that we love and admire today, the Steve Jobs, the Bill Gates, they did things that lasted beyond themselves. So in South Africa and Africa, people tend to have a very short-term mentality. It extends to corporates as well. How do I make my numbers this quarter, this year? It's all about short-term, short-term, short-term. And it takes a really mature person to think about leaving a legacy beyond what I do. Elon Musk's legacy of PayPal, of SpaceX, of SolarCity, of Tesla will last centuries after him, right? When I talk to entrepreneurs that are looking to solve problems, there's two things I say to them. Be an aspirin, not a vitamin. What's a vitamin? It enhances your life. It's a nice to have. An aspirin takes away your headache when you most badly need to go. At 3 in the morning, would you take a vitamin supplement? Would you take an aspirin if you have a headache? So when you build, or when entrepreneurs build products that are solving a serious pain point in the industry, using technology, solving problems versus creating nice-to-haves. Big difference. There is an exception to that. In very mature markets like Silicon Valley and New York and London, all the big companies that are now unicorns, Facebook and Twitter and Dropbox and Airbnb were, when they started off, vitamins. They were nice-to-haves. The world would have existed without Airbnb, without Facebook. We were all perfectly fine doing what we did. But the beauty of those businesses are businesses that started off as a nice-to-have that became a must-have. And those are businesses that, as investors, we love. Stop chasing money, folks. Chase a vision. And if you chase the right vision, the money will always end up following you. And I love this last one. Whether you think you can or you can't do something, you're right, either way. It's all about what you have in here. For those of us that have a key desire to make an impact through what we do in our networks, there are 3 things that I would keep in mind. Try and maximize social impact by 3 things: feasibility, sustainability, and scalability, in that order. For those of us that want to launch businesses, always think about, is there a basic feasibility, economic feasibility in what we do at that given point? Number 2, can that be sustained over a long period of time? And number 3, can that then be scaled across product or geographic horizons? I worked with startups all across the world for the last 8 years in Africa, and the concept of failure is unacceptable in the corporate world. And that is ironically going to be the demise of large corporations if they don't innovate. The irony of how startups succeed is because they fail. Almost every startup right now that we admire has pivoted at least 5 to 10 times before the actual product. Twitter, Dropbox, Facebook, Airbnb, Spotify did not do what they do now when they started. So as corporations of the future evolve, remember you have to embrace failure. Fail often, fail quick, admit and accept and move on. And you cannot please everyone. Oh my God. I think that was on purpose. That was a plug. It was definitely a plug, right?
And it wasn't planned, I promise.
It sounds. Ooh, 1988. Everyone else's opinion of you pales in comparison to your opinion of yourself. These may sound like cliched statements, but it's so true in today's business world. And no one can ever make you feel inferior without your consent. These are things that we all aim for. The white picket fence, the SUV, the labs. I mean, labs aren't that common here, but the 2.5 kids and the picket fence. If that's what moves you, that's fine, but do it for the right reasons. Know why you're doing something and not what you're doing or how you're doing it. And lastly, before I move into what I do here, just a nice phrase that I love. Life is really very short. Break the rules. Forgive quickly. Kiss slowly. I love that. Love truly. Laugh uncontrollably. And never regret anything that makes you smile. Just some life lessons that I've had the privilege of learning over the last 30 years. So, how much time do I have? 20 minutes? Roughly? Okay. So who am I? Try this as an experiment. Try and make a pyramid of everything in your life that you do. Trust me. And try and actually make it align. So let's see how creative you are. So I've been all these things. I have no idea how I managed to do all these things. But over a period of time, I'm a dad to 3 kids. I'm a writer, a musician, an engineer, a professor. I was a professor for a while. I volunteer. As you can see, I'm a philosopher occasionally, but I also run a venture capital fund. I invest in some of the most innovative African technology ventures. And at one point, yes, I was an investment bank on Wall Street. So why do I do all this? Gosh, did I put Mensa up there? Sorry, I shouldn't have put that. I'm an engineer by degree, moved to the world of corporate finance, got my MBA from Stanford in 2004. Obviously the heart and soul of Silicon Valley, so I saw the uptick and the downfall of Silicon Valley, and spent the next 9 years as a banker on Wall Street. I worked for the famous and now infamous Lehman Brothers until they collapsed. Was at Barclays for a while, and ended up coming to South Africa purely on holiday to watch the World Cup in 2010. And the world's perception of South Africa was, let me just say, very negative in 2010. But soccer is soccer, so you had millions of people coming down here, and the perception of South Africa changed very quickly. Obviously, everyone loves, and says Cape Town specifically, the sea, the sun, the sand, surf, etc. But the one thing that really stuck in my mind was how similar Cape Town and South Africa, broadly speaking, are to Silicon Valley and London from a tech perspective. Some of the smartest developers, designers, social media, marketing, and agencies are all based in South Africa, Cape Town and surrounds. So it's got the right metrics to make it the next innovation hub of the African continent. And Cape Town is often called the Silicon Cape of Africa. So over the last 8 years, I've invested both personally and through Startup Bootcamp that I'll explain in a few seconds in about 30 of the most innovative tech companies, tech startups on the continent that we are hoping will become the future Airbnbs, Dropboxes, Facebooks of Africa. I can share these slides with you later, but these are some of the investments we've done. So companies that do peer-to-peer lending, companies that do virtual digitized postal addresses, healthcare booking platforms, lay-by digitized travel. So pretty much anything that disrupts traditional brick and mortar businesses through technology is what we love investing in. The concept of venture capital is still very new in Africa, but over the last 5 years, it's grown from about $30 million annually to almost $600 million. And this is the future. And the one thing I would say to each and every one of you sitting here is, if you think that the insurance industry will not be disrupted, you are in for a very big surprise in the next 3 to 5 years, if not earlier. So FOMO is a real thing, fear of missing out. And we are at the cutting edge of seeing this happen to large banks, insurance companies, retailers, and telcos. So it is so important. Just like no one uses Walkmans anymore, there is a day in the not-so-distant future where people will not be carrying insurance policies in leather briefcases and going door-to-door selling stuff. It will change. So either you adapt to it or you get left out. And it's important to be aware of that now. It's too long for me to go through it, but pretty much technologies that change the world of finance, insurance, banking, and retail. Now, some context here, why I do what I do. The population of the African continent right now is about 1.5 billion people. The world's population is 7.5 billion, officially, today. In the next 82 years, 82? Yeah, turn of the century, the world's population is expected to hit 11.5 billion, right? Net. So there's a net increase of 4 billion people in the world in the next 85 years, right? First of all, by show of hands, what continent will account for the most of that net 4 billion increase in people?
Asia.
How many think Asia? How many think North America? Europe, Africa? Okay, so that's the easy question. It is Africa, right? But the question here is, what percentage of that net 4 billion new people, stats according to WHO and UNESCO, and the UN, do you think will come from Africa? Of that 4 billion, how many of you think 25% or less? What percentage of the net 4 billion new people will come from the African continent? How many of you think 25% or below? Okay. This is the continent, not South Africa, Africa, the continent. How many of you think that 50% of the net 4 billion new people will come from Africa? Okay. How many think 75% will come from Africa? So you're one of the few people that's actually on the right track. But 85% of the new 4 billion people will come from the African continent. This is research done by the world's leading actuaries. You guys would know a thing or two about actuaries. Health professionals and data scientists. Nigeria has a population of close to 200 million people today. Nigeria's population is expected to go beyond the US by 2050. Yeah, in the next 32 years. The US has about 370 million people. So Nigeria, which is about 1/20th the size of the US, will have a bigger population than the US. This is either a huge challenge for the African continent. So 1 in 3 people, when our grandkids are at varsity, 1 in 3 on the planet will be African. This is either a huge problem from a resource perspective or a massive opportunity, whichever way you look at it. The way we look at it from a venture capital perspective is it's an opportunity. Because the way current resources around telecoms, infrastructure, internet, schools, housing, water, food do not have the capacity to fulfill that growth in population. There are 3 types of innovation There's incremental innovation, there's transformative innovation, and then there's disruptive. An example of disruptive innovation, is when Africa skipped the entire landline age and went straight to mobile. When Africa skipped the entire CDMA age in phones and went straight to GSM. So Africa has a tendency of what we call leapfrogging. And the only way we can cope with 1/3 of the world's population on this continent in the next 82 years is through technology. And that's technology affecting everything we touch and feel, from property, real estate, to insurance, to manufacturing. Everything has to be disrupted by low cost, low capex, and high technology, aka software-driven services. So you can't create more education by building more schools. You can't have less people dying by building more hospitals. You can do it through technology, through remote surgery, through telemedicine, through online education. Technology is the only thing that can help us leapfrog this. And if 1 in 3 people on the world is from Africa, where do you think the innovation has to come from? Here. That's why I live here. I could be a very wealthy investment banker in New York, but I chose not to because the opportunity is here. The question is, how do you unlock that opportunity? So there's this concept of open innovation, where large corporates, that includes insurance companies, banks, retailers, etc., investors, startups, young digital talent, all work together to create an open innovation ecosystem where everyone benefits. The problem with innovation globally is it's almost always disproportionately benefiting one particular entity. It's a zero-sum game where everyone loses and someone wins. The only way you can move forward as a global economy is through open innovation. I'll explain that in a second. Excuse the verbiage here. Most of the world's top startup ecosystems, so Silicon Valley, Berlin, Tel Aviv, London, Mumbai, have 5 very common things that make them ripe for disruption. You have to start with the actual entrepreneurs. And those usually come from universities, research centers, tech transfer offices, so academia. The problem, though, is most people in academia end up going, so I'm talking about STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. They go and work as professors or consult to industry. This is true in South Africa as well. Very few very smart PhDs and master's students from Stellenbosch, from Pretoria, etc., go and run tech companies. Why? Because they're afraid. They'd rather go and be a professor. They'd rather go and consult to CSIR and do things that are more stable. My friends, that is changing. Silicon Valley exists today because the smartest people out of universities went and ran tech startups. So we have exactly what Silicon Valley has. We haven't yet implemented it. Number 2, a growing pool of risk capital from high net worth individuals. By the way, these are people that all of you serve. H&Is, family offices. Do you guys know that the largest concentration of wealth per capita, so wealth per capita, not just wealth, but wealth per capita, in the entire world, where do you think, or what city has the highest amount of wealth per capita? Hong Kong's in the top 5.
Singapore?
So I'm talking about cities. So Singapore would be a country. I know Singapore is a city as well, but very close. So I'm talking cities. So think Cape Town, Lagos, New York, London. So number 2 on the list is San Francisco. Right? Number 3 on the list is Tokyo. This is wealth per capita, not total wealth. Number 1 is Stellenbosch. Yeah. Stellenbosch is considered outside of Cape Town, yes. Because the population is so little, but the wealth is enormous. And also the wealth is private wealth that isn't disclosed. According to stats from Bloomberg, Factiva, the IMF, the largest amount of wealth per capita is in Stellenbosch. Let's not go there. My point though is this. There is no shortage of capital in South Africa or Africa. There is a shortage of risk capital. You will never find, if wealth is your only concern, you will rarely find a dollar billionaire or a multi-$100 millionaire anywhere in South Africa who's under 30, unless they've come from a wealthy family. But you find plenty of them in Silicon Valley. You find plenty of them in New York, plenty of them in Tel Aviv, because they understand the concept of risk. A lot of Africans don't. That's one of the reasons why we have fallen behind so much, but we are trying to change it through understanding how our world is changing. Again, technology is changing business as usual. So risk capital is very low in South Africa. Capital is very high. But all the money that the HNIs that you guys service ends up going where? To property, wine farms, JSE-listed equities, asset managers. Every third building in Newland is an asset management firm that invests in a combination of 50 entities. It's the most ludicrous thing in my mind. It glorified stock pickers. And trust me, that is not the way to create wealth. Corporates. We have a few corporates here. Corporates, without sounding warning bells here, if corporates do not learn to innovate and work with startups and not against them or ignore them, that will be the death of large corporates as well. We've seen it happen to the photography industry, to the publication industry. Trust me, the banks are next. The retailers are next. This is what I'm involved in, accelerators. Accelerators, how many of you know what Y Combinator is? Or Techstars is, or Startup Bootcamp is? Some people here know. Accelerators are the growth engines of the most powerful tech startups on the planet today. Spotify, Dropbox, Twitter, Airbnb. All these companies that are now worth billions of dollars, much more than some of the big insurance companies in South Africa could ever think of, came out of accelerators, where they literally, in 3 to 6 months, accelerate their growth from just an idea to a fully executed company. Most people now know here that Amazon and Apple are now worth more than $1 trillion. I mean, that number is staggering to me. Amazon is worth more than the entire GDP of sub-Saharan Africa. Sorry, Amazon and Apple together. Their GDP is more than the entire sub-Saharan Africa. And Amazon started 15 years ago by a dude called Jeff Bezos, who was driving from New York to Portland with his girlfriend and wanted to get some books. And he couldn't find a book. And they decided, let's just put some books online and try and create an online bookstore. 15 years ago. That company is now worth $1 trillion. Why am I saying this? Is because there is innovation coming out of our own backyard that we are ignoring, that some people understand. And we all need to, as brokers, as professionals, be aware of that. Of course, government has to play its part. And where government comes in is things like tax subsidies, R&D grants, to help entrepreneurs at the very bottom end to get early stage financing. A very critical thing here is a concept of B2C and B2B business models. How many of you understand what B2B and B2C business models are? A B2C is a business selling to a consumer, B2B is a business selling to a business. Most of the most successful startups in the world are B2C businesses. Facebook, Twitter, Dropbox, Airbnb, Spotify, they're all B2C. But that does not work in an emerging market like South Africa, Kenya, Africa, India. Because who holds all the big access to customers? The gatekeepers are big insurance companies. banks, telcos, retailers. It's always about the big five, the big five banks, the big five retailers, the big five insurance companies. So for a successful startup to scale, you have to convert a B2C business model into a B2B2C business model, where you as a startup leverage off of distribution networks of large corporates, but you keep the innovation and IP and use that to scale. There's a concept called cost of customer acquisition, which is what does it cost for you to acquire a customer? And how long is that customer with you, your customer lifetime value? The cost of acquiring customers is very, very high in Africa. But if you can reduce that cost by partnering with large corporations and leveraging off of their distribution, their licenses, but making them more innovative internally, that's gold. I'm going to skip some of this because this is just the idea of how venture capital works. But I'm going to talk about this very briefly. Most of us assume that the success of a business, its economic value, is linked to things like time, or things like how much money have I raised, how long have I been in business. The reality in today's digital world is the only thing that determines how much you're valued at is validation. How many people can you find that are willing to pay something for your product or service? You can be in business for 2 weeks or 2 decades. It does not matter. It's validation. And one of the things we teach corporates and startups a lot is how do you find a good product market fit? And working with large corporates is one of the best ways to solve that, provided they're open to being innovative. This is a snapshot of the total venture capital activity in Africa. Michelle, I can make these slides available for people that want to. Yeah, cool. I'm going to skip through all of this. What we do, I'm going to skip through all of this. Startup Bootcamp is the largest accelerator program in the world outside of the US. So we've invested in 650 companies across the world. Globally, the success rate of a tech startup is about 10%, if you're lucky. For us, 86% of all our companies are either going concerns, have been acquired, or have IPO'd. And because we work with large corporations across the world to provide distribution and licenses and access to market, and make these corporations more innovative by working with them, that number is staggeringly high. And 71% of all our companies have gone to raise venture capital, Series A and beyond rounds of funding globally. So we invest in the most innovative tech startups across the world and work with large corporations to do that. Myself and my partner Philip launched this in Africa for the very first time in Jan 2017. And this is where we are all over the world. We look at about 15,000 applications every year. In Africa alone, we look at about 1,000 and we pick 10. So there's a 1% success rate. We invest $20,000 into each company. They spend 3 months with us where they meet senior executives at banks, insurance companies, retailers, with the sole aim of scaling quickly, like in Silicon Valley, but modifying it to an African context. We help build the future tech startups of Africa. These are some of the big brands that we work with. There are a couple of insurance companies here. And we focus on these broad sectors: InsurTech, e-commerce, smart health, smart cities. Pretty much any industry that is ripe for disruption, we will help disrupt it. These are some of our existing partners. I should have had more time for this. I'm going to end quickly with the concept of why corporates struggle to work with startups. Corporates fear this concept of cannibalization, where they don't want to eat their own dog food. But that fear, if you do anything out of fear, you're bound to fail because it's a reaction, not a proactive response. Corporates have structural obstacles to innovation. They want predictable, consistent results. And investors that invest in corporates, shareholders, expect predictable financial results. Most of the employees in corporates aren't trained to create new businesses. They're trained to manage existing businesses. Innovation is usually an afterthought at a corporate. And last but not least, there's this personal risk-reward profile. Failure is not often well received. So this is how corporates think, and this is how they kill innovation. So an example, the innovation will say, well, our first idea has failed. What do managers say? That's unacceptable. These are real words that people use. These are said by CEOs of big banks and insurance companies in South Africa that I've met and dealt with personally. Innovation within a corporate, we have a brand new product. What do lawyers say? We might get sued for that. We don't have precedents for that. Kills innovation. We want to use external service providers. No, those are not approved. They need procurement. Killed. Can we have some money for this project? What's the first question they ask? What's your 5-year pro forma? Can't do that. So it's applying an old mindset to traditional mindsets to new technologies that does not work. This is why the US and Europe are far ahead of us, because they don't think like this. So the idea here really is to understand, how do you change your business model and not just build new products? If you look at the S&P 500 over the last 20 years, the majority of returns for the S&P 500 are because of business model innovation, not new products. If you want new products, go work for this company. Procter & Gamble, Unilever. Companies love to create new products, but new products mean nothing if you don't change your business model. Airbnb, Uber, Dropbox, Pinterest, all they have is different ways of selling the same thing to customers. Back in the day, all that we think of is, well, I have a product, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to get money for it. It's an asset sale. When us insurance brokers think of, I have a product, a life policy or a content insurance, I'm going to sell it, collect the premium. That's one business model. The world's most successful companies have at least 4 business models where they make money. Bait and hook. You sell something at a very cheap price and sell add-ons. Air fresheners, blades, printer cartridges. Something that we can touch and feel. Why can't you apply that to the insurance industry? Freemium models. LinkedIn. Spotify, subscription models. On-demand models. Uber, Amazon Prime, Amazon Dash. Tesla. Has anyone heard of the Dollar Shave Club before? Oh my God. The Dollar Shave Club revolutionized the concept of taking out middlemen. Literally selling simple shaving blades to men, not electronic razors, simple 1 or 2 blade razors to men across the US for $1, delivered to your door in packs of whatever. No retailers, wholesalers, nothing. They're now $1 billion company. Tesla. Tesla direct from the factory to the owner. No dealers. No middlemen. So, sorry? So if you were a publishing house and you were worried about your job being taken over, what did Henry Ford say? If I wanted more customers, I would have built faster horses. But he built a car instead. So don't be afraid of innovation. Adapt to it. But that was one of the questions, the polls that people answered Charles Darwin to. The most intelligent people here will not survive. It's people that can adapt that will eventually survive. Anyway, I'm going to end here. And with a quote from Mandela, it says, "It's always impossible until it's done." Those are my details. I'm going to be here till about 4 o'clock. Very happy to talk to any of you about thoughts that you may have, what I do, why I do it. But the one parting thought is you cannot rest on your laurels and keep doing what you're doing, because the world is changing ridiculously fast. and you have to adapt or you will die. On that very somber note. Thank you.